Okay, so today's video topic is The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, which is a book I read a while ago that kind of delves into pessimism and the philosophies associated with it. So I stumbled across this book, probably because I was looking into existential philosophy and things of the sort. So it's um, it's a book written by a horror author, and basically the horror author takes a jab at philosophy. And at a very high level, the book is basically just the author finding pessimist philosophers that have existed in the past and just presenting their arguments to you in a new light. So, the author puts his own interesting spin on the arguments, but I guess the author isn't really doing any philosophy of his own. But the author he does have a goal here, and I'm going to get to that later because I just kind of had a realization about what his goal was with this book. Um, so, some of the one of the philosophers that he talks a lot about is this guy named um, Peter Wessel Zapf. I don't really know how to pronounce his name. I think he was Polish. But his main argument is that consciousness is an evolutionary misstep. So, evolution happens, and then, and this guy's a big pessimist, right? Like, all of these philosophers are very big pessimists, and so their arguments, are just, like, very unpopular, right? Like, you won't hear people speak about these guys because their philosophies are, pessimistic and they just suck. Like, no one wants to learn about, a bunch of sad, like, just staring into the void kind of philosophies. But that's what makes this book interesting because you get to see a different side of philosophy. You get to see a side of, I don't know, I guess you're just like taking a walk on the dark side, right? And then uh, coming back out of it with a more full understanding of things, I guess, right? Because you're like, oh, okay, I learned about these ideas. I really don't like these ideas, and that can make you uh, more sure of yourself in optimism, right? I consider myself an optimist, but I'm sure of optimism more so because when you study pessimism and then and this is kind of like an ad hominem attack to all of these philosophers who are pessimists, but their lives suck. They don't have good lives, um, you know, because they're pessimists, right? So they just focus on the negative. But yeah, I'm getting sidetracked here. So this guy Peter Wessel Zapf, he thought that that consciousness was an evolutionary misstep and that we basically humans over evolved and now we're self aware and then now we have a search for meaning, like why am I here? Why do I have to die? You know, why why is this guy here? And you just like have all these questions, right? Um, you're self aware, right? Because consciousness is hard to define, but self awareness, under most definitions of consciousness, that those things go together, right? And other animals, right? Because he's talking about humans here as like as a race, and the other animals basically don't have this same level of consciousness as humans, per Peter Wessel Zapf. That's what he's saying. But we've observed that crows mourn their dead crows, and chimpanzees have they get sad when a relative dies. So we know that humans aren't the only ones that are aware of death, but we don't know to what extent the other animals are aware of death. Um, but yeah, that doesn't change the fact that it like gives people anxiety. Like it also gives life meaning. But anyways, this video is not supposed to be a positive video, so I'm not gonna rebuttal any of these. claims. Well, maybe I will at the end, but um, yeah, basically, and his solution, um, Zapf, he basically outlines the ways that humans cope with um, the fact that life, the fact that humans come into this world and then we have all these questions about the world, but these questions are never ending. Like we're never satisfied with the answers to the meaning of life or why we have to die. And why are we never satisfied? Because even if you give somebody an answer, if they don't like, if I tell you the meaning of life is to pursue power and to grow as a person, right? Someone can be asking for the meaning of life, and then you can give that to them, and just because you told them what the meaning of life is, that's not going to immediately solve all of their issues. Or they'll be like, oh, of course that's the meaning of life, yeah, and then just go on with their day. That's like a question that you constantly ask yourself all the time. um, and some people do find the meaning, right? But that's not going to be satisfactory to someone else's question to the meaning of life. That's just going to, so everyone figures it out, right? There's no one answer. And so basically, the fact that there's no one answer kind of demonstrate that like life is unable to fulfill its own uh, question. I guess is like there's not enough in existence that can answer a question. I wrote a note about this because I'm having a hard time articulating it. Let's see. It is something about, yeah, humans not being able to answer their own question. So I just got Obsidian, which is a note-taking app, and you can connect a bunch of things together, which is really cool. Okay, here we go. So, the human craving for justification on life, death, and meaning cannot be satisfied. Hence, humanity has a need that life cannot fully satisfy. So, essentially to Zapf, this is like a huge problem because it's like, well, you know, there's no answering it, right? And so I guess um, he kind of states that there's for like humans, right, like why haven't we all killed ourselves, or why have we not stopped reproducing? So according to his philosophy, according to Zapf, right, everyone has their own explanation for everything. Just because this guy's a philosopher does not make him correct. um, but this it's just interesting to hear and to you know listen to what other people have to say about things. In this case, it's a pessimist, right? But there's a lot of inspirational stuff all over the internet. A lot of super happy stuff all the time, and it's I don't know. It's just an interesting perspective to see what like real hardcore pessimists have to say about life. So he's saying that the way that we cope with like the paradox of being bored and a search for meaning that it will never be satisfied is number one is isolation. So this is basically just isolating yourself from feelings, from situations, from whatever. Like someone dies, and then instead of staring into the void, you're like, oh well, you just move on with your day. um, you basically just pretend that these things don't exist. You pretend that death doesn't exist. You pretend that suffering doesn't exist. Um, you don't really worry about the cosmic insignificance of everything because, well, okay, I'm not gonna put in my own philosophy and psychology into there, but that's that to him. This is what isolation is. Is it's isolating yourself from these from these questions. Another way that humans cope is with anchoring, which is basically anchoring your identity, yourself, to external things like institutions. So like religion, for example, is probably one of the best examples because religion has like a very nice guideline. And if you're worried about all these, deaths and questions and meaning of life and stuff, religion prescribes to you an amazing, blueprint, a path that you can follow, right? An ideology to which you can subscribe. And that's great. Another one, I'm just listing out examples here, like there's nationalism, right? So like some people, they love their country, right? And so, their country gives them meaning. There's people that like, whatever sorts of institutions, school, college, maybe you get, very deep into studies and stuff. And then, I'm probably confounding these because it sounds like these are going to start overlapping. But, the third thing that he says that humans do to, avoid this paradox of life is distraction, right? So this one's very easy. Drugs, those do a great job of, you don't have to worry about all that stuff if you're, high on whatever or you're down on whatever, right? You can just, distract yourself, and that's amazing. And then the final one is sublimation, which is basically you spend time doing art and philosophy, and you kind of, I guess you kind of you confront the despair directly, right? So your artwork might reflect, some of the things that you struggle with, and I mean, I guess in Zapf's case, he, contemplated philosophy and, thinking about these problems head on. He was kind of turning into like a circle, though, that wasn't really good. Maybe he could have brought an external philosophy or, I don't know why. I don't know why there's a group of philosophers that are so pessimist, and it's definitely the way they grew up and the events that happened to them that turned them into these people. And then the way, and I guess I'll get into kind of my own philosophy here, like my own explanation, and this, everyone has their own explanation, but I tend to feel that with pessimist philosophies, there's kind of a sense of superiority in that the pessimists see the world for what it really is, and nothing will convince them otherwise. And essentially just bury their head in the sand. And I'm thinking now about like, radical optimists, and it seems like radical optimists, they acknowledge they acknowledge pessimism, but they have ways of like combating the pessimism. And in pessimist philosophies, they acknowledge good things, such as Zapf, for example, when he's talking about isolation, anchoring, distraction, sublimation. I mean, those, maybe not distraction, but, even being a workaholic can fall under distraction, or having a very awesome hobby like rally racing, right? You rally race, you feel alive, and it's cool. That can be your distraction too, right? And so when Zapf talks about these four ways of, dealing with reality, I mean, these four things: isolation, anchoring, distraction, sublimation. These are all things that like an optimist does on a regular basis. They are good things. They are like legitimately good. Like, you do not want to contemplate the void all the time. Why? Well, I mean, it's tiring. It's not necessarily boring, but I mean, I guess these are just like my optimist colors showing now. I don't understand why you would want to do that. But that's besides the point of the book. But basically, the pessimists, they have their own ways of combating optimism, and I don't know why you would want to do that. So I guess maybe pessimists and optimists, both think that they're superior to each other. Because I guess I think that I'm superior than pessimists, but I'm saying that, pessimists think that they're superior to optimists because they see like reality. I don't know. It's kind of a long tangent there, but that's Peter Wessel Zapp's yeah, his ways of coping with the deep questions. So another person that the author Thomas Ligotti. This Thomas Ligotti is the guy who wrote this book, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race. Another author he talks about is Julius Bonson. What did I write about this guy? Uh, Yeah, Julius Bond. I have a lot less written on him, but he's basically connected to a bunch of other philosophers. So it kind of seems like everyone knows Arthur Schopenhauer for his, real life, gritty, right? Like he was a pessimist philosopher too. And if you look into his life, I mean, he has every reason to be. Um, and his actions show that as well. Um, but a lot of these philosophers that you've never heard of that are pessimists, like Arthur Schopenhauer, might be like the most um, influential of the pessimist philosophers, and then you can kind of like follow who his disciples are, and then it'll link you to like these other philosophers. I don't really have much to say about Julius Bonson. Um, let's see who else is interesting. I guess I just have some quotes. I guess I'll just read like another quote. This quote is by the author, and well, I guess I can get to the point of the book, or what I think the point of the book is. So, the author is a horror fiction writer, and he writes like existential horror and all that stuff, and he's good. Apparently, I've only started reading another one of his nonfiction books. This book is more just like going into philosophy. Um, but in this quote, the point of the book is that you experience horror through horror films, through horror books, and these feelings that the genre of horror gives you kind of simulate feelings that you've had in real life, right? That's why they're scary, but it's a movie or a book, so you're safe. So it's like kind of like a roller coaster, but you know the horror draws elements from real life. And what the author Thomas Ligotti is doing, which I think he's doing it in a genius way, is he's bringing horror into real life, like into your life as the reader. This book, personally, it did not make me suicidal or anything, but it did make me question the ethics of having children, which was pretty crazy. I've always wanted to have kids my whole life, and for a good 1 to 2 months after I read the book, I I guess I thought that I'm lucky that, I'm happy and that I can, cope with existence. But I would be an asshole to bring children into this world and then expect them to figure it out, right? Um, because, what if they don't? And if they don't have it, you know, it's not like it's not exactly like everyone for themselves, but people have different problems, coping with reality, right? And just because you cope with reality and your partner copes with reality, that does not mean that your kid, is, or that your kid's going to be happy, right? This is just like, it's something out of your control. Like, they are an individual, and they will have their beliefs and their way of thinking about things. So, yeah, this book just made me not want to have kids for 2 months. That's basically the strongest effect it had on me. It also made me not want to be like these people at all. But I guess reading this book to me has kind of been like watching a car accident from far, right? So you're driving and you see like a car accident, and like, you look, it's like, oh shit. I don't know. It's what morbid curiosity, I guess, is I had a morbid curiosity to see what these pessimist philosophers were talking about and what their arguments were. Um, so now for this quote. And this is about the author bringing in, elements of horror into real life. So, whether or not there are manifestations of the supernatural, they are horrifying to us in concept, since we think ourselves to be living in a natural world, which may be a festival of massacres, but only in a physical rather than metaphysical purport. This is why we routinely equate the supernatural with horror. And a puppet possessed of life would exemplify just such a horror, because it would negate all conceptions of a natural physicalism and affirm a metaphysics of chaos and nightmare. So what this is saying basically, I took this quote as an excerpt. I don't have a lot of quotes in the notes, but I like this one specifically because we live in a natural world, and like, what does that mean? Because if in philosophy, a natural world is like the opposite of a supernatural world. Like, a natural world means that there's like cause and effects, and there's like no, I mean, put simply, like, magic doesn't exist. There's no God. Actually, I don't know if that, yeah, that doesn't exclude that God could happen, but there's no miracles, right? So it means, like, maybe even if there is a God, like, Moses definitely did not part the Red Sea. Like, that did not happen in a natural world. Superman can't exist. Like a natural world is like normal, right? And then a supernatural world is a world where miracles exist, where magic exists, like all that kind of stuff. So, and if you're a normal person, I mean, normally we don't see supernatural things occur, right? And so that's why when we do see supernatural things, which I never have, I've never seen anything supernatural, because I don't believe in it, and I don't want to start believing in it, because I think if I do start believing in supernatural things, they will start happening, and that's really freaky, so I don't want to go there. But I guess that's why I like this quote, because this quote is like literally is exactly talking about that, is that, like, unnatural things that happen are super scary because they're not supposed to happen. And in the book, I didn't take this as a quote, but I don't know, he's an amazing author, but the way he describes it is he's basically talking about a doll that's sitting on your bookshelf, and it's like late at night, and you're just like in bed, trying to go to sleep, but it's like dark in your room, and you're like looking around, and then you see the doll move. It's like, what the fuck? Like, what do you do? I mean, were you tweaking out? Like, did it actually move? There's no way that it actually moved. Dolls don't move. That's not a normal thing. That is not natural. So why did it move? Right? And he kind of just, I don't know. He did a really good job of just, it was like really scary when I read that. I was like, oh my God. It's freaky. So, yeah, overall, it's a really good book. It's a very different. I've never read a book like this. I don't read a lot of horror books. Actually, I don't read any horror books. I don't really like horror movies. I don't like supernatural movies. I don't like movies with demons. Well, I guess like demons is like, if it's like an action movie, it's fine. What I'm talking about is like the paranormal demons, or anything that has to do with exorcisms, just anything supernatural. I don't like it. Why? There's some people, they have a very, they watch the movie, it's entertaining, and then they go on with the rest of their day, and that's fine. And I'm very happy for them. I'm not one of those people. Because I guess I do let these thoughts kind of like affect me. These like conspiracy against the human race, and like the whole void thing is like, even, looking at like this dark corner of my closet, it's like I have no evidence that, a spirit is going to come out of there and like possess me. I don't have any evidence that that can't happen. It's never happened in the past, but that doesn't mean that it can't happen. Or just like something being behind you. Like, I don't like that either. Um, and I don't know, maybe it's like recursive thoughts or whatever, but sometimes I get caught in these like loops and I can't stop, thinking about like something in here, right? So, anyways, that's why I don't really like supernatural stuff. But it was very cool. It's a very cool book. Um, so with that being said, yeah, there's like other thoughts for us to talk about, but I don't know. How long is this video? This video is 25 minutes. Okay. All right, cool. Well, that concludes the video. Thomas Ligotti is the author. The book is called The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, and it is a very unique, cool book that, delves into pessimism for once instead of, all this like happy stuff. And it's September, October, right? Halloween's next month, so I don't know, kind of creepy video. So awesome. Enjoy life, everyone, and don't get caught up with all the pessimist stuff. Peace.